Good evening and welcome to Liberty and Friends, your Sunday evening news roundup show. That's your Sunday evening news roundup show. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. Mono Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Shalom, Prenant, good people, welcome to it. Remember, please, all you need to do, your entrance fee here on the BDL show, on any of my shows, is to hit that like button, whether you're watching this on Facebook, Twitter, or on YouTube. Hit that like button. It really does help get this stream out to a much broader audience. And actually, to be quite honest, it does help me beat some of the shadow banning that I'm experiencing on some of these platforms. That is, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. I have a packed full house tonight. Tonight we have more guests than we've ever had before. And I'm really glad for that because it enriches the content. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Please remember, hit that like button. Do it now. Remember, as we always say on the show, it helps feed a kid in Africa. I've never really said that kid isn't me, so make sure you do hit that like button. Welcome to it. This is the Big Daddy Liberty Shows, Liberty and Friends. All right, so let me bring on my guest tonight. As I said, it is a full house, guys. Hit that like button, share the stream because you want to hear. You don't want to miss this first segment in particular because it involves you, the ordinary citizen. If you've been watching my channel this past week and the various vlogs that I've put out, we've been prosecuting that idea that actually it's about time that the ordinary citizen in various, whether they represent themselves as various sectors, i.e. as business people or the like, or as just individuals and families, it's up to you now to push back against the political elites and those who continue to appropriate this power of a state of disaster, in inverted commas, and really the lockdown, which continues to trample on your freedoms, your rights, and your liberties. So with that being said, to help me unpack this topic and many more, which we're going to look at tonight, he is the host of the ManPatria podcast. He's a chap who I know is a firm favorite here on the BDL show. You guys love him for his own channel. Make sure you subscribe and you hit that like button at ManPatria on YouTube and of course on all socials. There he is on screen. Dumo, Denga. Good evening, Puti. Welcome to LNF.
Thanks for having me, Sihle. It's always a pleasure to be on. And yes, as always, I'm looking forward to having a great discussion today.
A tada. Welcome to it. Another chap who I know is a firm favorite here in the house. He is also the host of his own show, a namesake show in his case, the Joe Emilio Show. There he is, Joe Emilio. Joe, good evening.
Good evening, Sihle. Sorry, I was on mute. Good evening, guys. Thank you so much, Sihle, for having me once again.
A tada, welcome to it, brother man. And of course, another. This one is a favorite by audience demand. That's actually how popular she is. I'm talking, of course, about the fair maiden all the way from the barrel in the Weskop, Prof. Nolu, Maki. Nolu, hello, good evening.
Good evening, Sihle. Good evening to the guest and everyone. Good to be back. Happy New Year.
There she is. And Happy New Year to you, my great sister. Welcome to it. And then I must come to someone who, how do I introduce this chap? You know, if there's anybody who can quite literally opine on any topic and do so with an intellectual sharpness that rivals anybody who you happen to follow on your favorite socials, it must be this chap. I'm talking, of course, about head of campaigns at the IRR, Gabriel Crouse. There he is. Gabriel, good evening.
Ahoy. Dude, what a fabulous introduction. Thank you, Sihle. I'll try and live up to that.
Chief,
but it's always a pleasure to be here. I really enjoy it.
Excellent, my brother. And of course, a chap who I've had him once on the show, and he was definitely a favorite. If I go back, I did go back to that episode to check some of the comments. He's a chap, of course, who is from that awesome organization that is doing that groundwork type advocacy and community work, Afriforum. I'm talking, of course, about Jacques Broodryk. Jacques, good evening.
Good evening, Sikhle. Great to be here.
Homie, good to have you. Good to have you. And of course, last but definitely not least, we had a chat this week. He's the awesome oak who is at the helm of the Business League, or that's the Sakeliga, as hulle sê in Afrikaans. Ek praat van Piet Leroux. Piet, good evening and welcome to the show.
Hi, goeienaand. Good evening, Sikhle. Great, thanks for the invitation. Nice to be joined with your esteemed colleagues.
Awesome, brother. It is so good to have you on. Now, I'm mindful, Pete, that you do have to dash a bit early in the show. That's totally fine, which is perhaps why I wanted us, pardon me, to begin here. Pete, you and I had this conversation this week, with you expressing the importance of the business community in particular, who have been hammered by this lockdown, by this state of disaster, for this to actually end. Sakeliga is taking action, legal action at that. What are you guys up to?
Sikhle, our position from the beginning of lockdown was focused on one issue, that was to mitigate the impact of lockdown and to get it abolished. Lockdown, we understand that people acted under circumstances of uncertainty, and looking back at it, I'm sure many people would want to do things differently. So our role was to mitigate that, and we tried to get our members to keep the economy going because, as we know, more than 1 million people today don't have jobs, and they did have before lockdown, among other problems. We kept doing that until recently, when it became obvious that some governments in the world and some state-aligned business groups, including I would include in this statement, are pushing for a new thing, which is vaccine mandates, which is a compulsion to be vaccinated or otherwise have your life made hell, being denied access to normal public life. This is new. People present it as if it's something that's always been there, vaccine compulsion, etc. No, forcing businesses to become agents for the monitored society and establishing all around in society checkpoints for who and who may not enter public spheres. That is new, and we're very much in a position to this. And so that's what we're doing. We want to get lockdown over, normality restored, start to recover the economy and our lives. That is just as important as many other things. And then now also prevent businesses becoming the enforcers and agents and enablers of a monitored society.
Sikhle, you're muted, eh?
Sorry about that. As I was saying, I do want to unpack some of those things that you're raising, Pete, because they're absolutely important to the lifeblood that is South Africa. There is no South Africa without a booming and really growing private sector. And when I say private sector, I don't mean just big business, but also the small mom and pop shops, which are the very businesses that have been decimated by this ongoing state of disaster. Two things that I want to just quickly unpack before I throw it to the rest of the panel. And in fact, I'll come to Gabriel after this because his organization is also waging a concerted battle in this regard. Pete, two things that you raised. I'll begin with the latter. This notion that the business community should, by force of regulations, be the enforcers of statist regulations around what can and can't be done, who can and can't enter a certain space. Surely we need to have that fight around who owns the business. Is it the entrepreneur who started it, who runs it on a day-to-day basis, or is it some state official who lives and works in Pretoria, safely ensconced behind laws and tax money?
Yes, Sikhle. Obviously, one of the key problems with the whole approach to lockdown was its centralization. We've seen states all over the world centralize, and when you centralize, it looks great. You're handling this complex problem with the hoo-ha and big legislation and big changes to society, but actually, maybe letting people decide what was appropriate in their circumstances would have been more effective. It would have been less prestigious for heads of state or heads of state-aligned lobby groups, but it would have been much more appropriate. But there's a deeper question, Sikhle, and I can refer you to a great American scholar called Robert Nisbet. He wrote a book where a couple of years ago, 50 years ago or so, But his point was that if we allow society to devolve into only having states and individuals, and not of intermediate nexus of intermediate societies, then we don't have a proper constitutional social order. We're not able to balance the powers. And once we have what we've seen growing in these past 2 years now, is having states decide and becoming very, very powerful. And once we allow them to make businesses the enforcers of vaccine mandates and report to the state who enters and who doesn't enter their buildings, under what circumstances, and what's been promulgated last in the government gazette, then we are making society poorer, because we are allowing there to be a power vacuum. We'll have a very powerful state, and we'll have agents of enforcement. We won't have independent business anymore. So Sakeliga is all about making sure business is independent. That's our constitutional duty in the broader sense of the word. Without independent business, we can't have a flourishing social order.
Again, perfectly put, because it comes back to that first point, therefore, you made, which I wanted you to just unpack before I throw it to the audience. It's this notion, really, that, on the one hand, you of course, you want, you want to defeat, excuse me, folks. I have the fan running right next to me. I'm so parched. On the one hand, you want to defeat this idea that it's not the business owner who makes decisions on their business, that some politician somehow, simply because they sit in some centralized authority or a quote-unquote command council, somehow knows best for the economy, can account for the millions, if not billions, of transactions that happen on a day-to-day basis. Debunking that myth, of course, but also taking it back to the idea of, the business owner themselves. I'm struggling to formulate this question because it's at the heart of so many people who are watching this and asked me questions after our interview. That question of how do we actually fight this? And this is where I want you to unpack the details of the legal challenge or the legal sort of strategy that you guys took, because it's so clever, Piet, and I really want you to unpack it very briefly.
Okay, so Sihle, first, we have a legal challenge that we're mounting, but I know many other organizations are doing it as well. And we're certainly glad for that, because this whole concatenation or collective momentum against lockdown is what we need. So the line we are taking at Sakeliga is to say that there is no disaster. And if there is no disaster, you can't have a state of disaster. And we think that we've been convinced that lockdown and the whole state of disaster should be ended a long while ago, if ever there should have been one. But the point is, you have to think when and under what circumstances, what angle does a legal challenge have the most chance of success? Our angle right now, we've given the department until the 28th of January to tell us whether they're going to comply or not, is the following. In the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, that's in course Dlamini-Zuma's department, she's the one who declared a state of disaster. But she could only do that on the basis of a previous administrative step by Dr. Tao in her department, who's the head of the National Disaster Management Center. And that guy said he's responsible for classifying things as a disaster, either provincial or national. Once he's made a classification, then she may respond with a proclamation of a state of disaster, and she may regulate after that. So what we're going to do now is not try and get her, we have running legal challenges to get all her records, all her decisions, and we'll challenge that when the time's right. But right now, we are going to try and force that Dr. Tao to reassess and declassify the current situation as a state of disaster. Once that happens, automatically, there can no longer be a state of disaster by Dlamini-Zuma, and so then we don't have to fight and win her in court on this matter.
Absolutely. Very, very, as I said, very, very ingenious approach here. And really one which, when you said it in that vlog that we did, I've never seen, the comments go as crazy as they did at that time. Massive, massive support for you guys. And I'm hoping it'll reflect in the numbers to Sakeliga. Piet, I know you do have to dash. And so please feel free to hop off anytime you need to.
Yeah, I'll stay for another 50 minutes or so. I'll hang around.
Perfect, my brother. Thank you so much. Because I'm going to throw it to the guys here in the panel. Really, I must come to you, Gabriel, first, because Piet himself alluded to the fact that there are other organizations who are fighting this, yours being another that comes to mind. That is, of course, the Institute of Race Relations. Gabriel, just as a refresher to those who might have missed the vlog we did, what are you guys up to? What have you done this week? I know there was a petition that you guys handed off at the union buildings. Let's begin there. And what other action are you guys looking to take?
Sure. So by last week, Friday, not this Friday, the one before that, we had over 16,000 people who had signed on to our petition to end the state of disaster, to disband the Command Council, and to amend the legislation so that we never see a superpower being invented called a Command Council that can just boss everyone around again indefinitely.
Absolutely.
Okay, those are the three steps. And we delivered those signatures. We went to the union buildings, had some trouble with the police there, but we got our message through, and we went to the Kochte Ministry as well, where, oddly enough, some of the staff, as we were leaving, I've shared this anecdote before. As we were leaving, we said, "Oh, it was very formal, very formal." And then we said, "Have a good weekend." They said, "Have a good weekend." They said, "I'll have a really good weekend if they just end the state of disaster so we can just get back to normal." And they said, "Yeah." And then they stopped and they said, "No." And then they walked away. Anyway, so they're human people. There are actually humans in government that can see how crazy this thing is. But we have to put pressure. Now, my line is as follows. This is going to end one of two ways. The easy way or the hard way. The hard way is going to court. And we are very impressed with Sakeliga's legal strategy. We see that there are other civil society members that are into this as well. We have been building a paper trail through correspondence with the department with the Kochte department, as well as the presidency, as well as the Command Council. And we are, we're ready to jump into court action as well if this is going to be needed. It would be preferable, obviously, to everyone involved if we could end this disaster before we go to court. Because when you go to court, it takes time and it costs money. And you know what? South Africans need to learn this other process of public pressure, and that it can be effective, and that it can be, and that it's a way of holding people to account. So the easy way or the hard way, one way or another, we're working together. We're going to make it happen. In terms of what that pressure has resulted in, that very morning, after we announced that we're sending our delegation to the union buildings, Health Minister Joe Pahla said he sees this pressure coming from civil society, and government is not going to be rushed into anything, but they're going to have a meeting they have to end the state of disaster at some point, and they actually have to start thinking about how to do that. So they're going to have a meeting between the DOH and the Command Council to figure out how to do that. Thereafter, in this week, so that has happened, and they're making plans. Not very satisfying, but it's interesting. Also, Cyril Ramaphosa was subjected to media questions, which never happens, because he was announcing the R1 billion vaccine production plant in Cape Town. That was very exciting. So he had to talk to the media. The media asked, "What do you make of all of this?" And he's like, "Well, you know what? We're seeing the pressure from those guys that are telling us to end the state of disaster, and they've got a good argument." Unfortunately, he went on to say they've got a good argument that, maybe actually we should start to examine whether we should deal with these issues in another manner. No, they should have already examined that from the beginning. Since this is a constitutional democracy, the moment you start ruling by decree, the moment you become a rudimentary dictatorship, which is what this country became when the Command Council was authorized, from that very moment, every Democrat should be hungry for the constitutional norms to return. Every day, the president should have been looking, how today can I get closer to getting us back to being a proper constitutional democracy with parliamentary oversight? The fact that it's coming late is very frustrating, but I think it does reflect that pressure builds. Since then, we're over 20,000 petition signatures to our petition. We'll be driving that forward. We've got, I think, about 10,000 on our petition to stop the vaccine mandate. Please join on that as well. To be clear, You know, if someone doesn't want to let you into their house because you haven't been vaccinated, that's their choice. If a business doesn't want to let you in personally because they've made that decision personally, that's their choice. I respect that choice and I will defend that choice. Even if I think it's the wrong choice, I'll defend the right to make that choice. But having businesses being co-opted into enforcement of state regulations, which has already happened, this has got to go. And to give you a sense of how mad the vaccine mandate is, two points. One is Professor Celia Cohen, Israeli advisor. Israel has had the best vaccine program in the world. Best vaccine program. You know, they were the first to get the most people vaccinated. It was very exciting. What does Professor Cohen say now? He's about vaccine mandates in Israel. Two things. Firstly, they have repealed most of them. So the idea that you need to produce a vaccine passport to go to a supermarket or a shopping mall or anything like that, that has just been repealed in Israel. Secondly, even before it was repealed, it was hardly being enforced. People could see that this was kind of silly, and so it had just become a bit of a joke. You'd have a security guard at the front of the supermall of the shopping mall, but people were still going in. So he's saying the vaccine passports are effectively useless, not enforced, are officially being repealed. And unfortunately, he's saying Israel might not have done the best by just getting everyone vaccinated, because the countries that are doing the best are countries like South Africa, where a lot of people have been infected. Now, that's not to say you should go out and get infected. Let me say, as the professor says, please don't do that. That's kind of crazy. But in South Africa, we at the Institute have pressured private businesses and government to release their estimates and their sero studies from the start of 2021. I have consistently, that's been like one of the not so fun parts of my job, is calling people at Discovery, calling people at the DOH, calling people at the SAMRNC to get them to say, how many people have been infected? Discovery estimated 80% in the winter, and the SAMRC has just come out with a study with Professor Shebia Mahdi, where 80% of Gautengers had clearly been infected. And the actual number could be higher, but those were the ones that were getting clear positives over the age of 50. I'll say one last thing, and this is very disturbing, and I want to be careful about this, but this is an important scientific result that they found. The odds ratio between people who are vaccinated and people who are unvaccinated in terms of how likely were they to have previously been infected. Now, you don't know if they're getting infected before or after they got vaccinated, but the odds ratio was 6.22. People who were unvaccinated were 6.22 times less likely to have been previously infected. People who were vaccinated were 6 times more likely to be infected. Now, that is probably because a lot of people who got vaccinated had already been infected, which is kind of a slightly useless vaccination. Maybe it's good, but it's definitely not as good as vaccinating someone who's never been infected. Partly it might be that people get vaccinated, feel more casual, and are then more likely to get infected and then maybe pass it on. We know that vaccines are non-sterilizing. And the argument behind the mandate is that the more vaccine, if you force people to vaccinate, you're going to reduce their chances of passing it on. It just doesn't fit very well with this odds ratio finding in the largest sero study, the most up-to-date sero study in South Africa. It seems much more like there are many factors in play. Okay, so from a scientific perspective, the country with the most aggressive vaccine program in the world, their top scientists are saying, we don't know if this was actually a great idea, and we're definitely not doing this anymore. And in South African context, it looks like 80-90% of us have already been infected. That gives more robust protection than vaccination. To try and force a vaccine mandate now just doesn't make scientific sense. It does make political sense, for the simple reason that once you can prove to everyone that you can make them do whatever you want them to do, then you have the power to do whatever you want to do. And as you guys all very well know, there is an ambitious plan called the National Democratic Revolution that the ANC has been re-ratifying for the last 50 years since Morogoro. And it would be delightful if you could prove to everyone we can make anyone do anything. That would accelerate that program dramatically. So we've got to stop this thing, and we've got to stop it now.
Absolutely. Again, I love the fact that you brought that up because it touches on points that Piet and I have actually spoken about before. And I want to throw it open here, guys. Piet, I'll come back to you because I know you've raised this particular point before to say, there is an ideological underpinning to everything that we're seeing here. And this is when we had that conversation on licensing, Piet. And if you remember, that was quite a while back during the lockdown, actually, when you guys were fighting this attempt by the state to introduce a licensing regime, which would effectively, in effect, really nationalize business to an extent, which is exactly what the ideological underpinnings are of this particular government. Before I come to you, Piet, as I maybe see you're shushing a kid there in the background, let me come to Jacques, because I know, Jacques, you guys at Afriforum, it's not like you guys have been quiet about this. You have been raising your voice, mobilizing members and even society to push back against this. Some of the actions you guys have taken, just very briefly.
Yeah, thanks, Sakeliga. Yeah, so we've been fighting against some of these ludicrous regulations and power abuses since the beginning. If you remember, I think the first case we took on was the quarantine camps. A lot of people have forgotten about that, but government actually forced people into quarantine camps where they lived in terrible circumstances and very unhygienic circumstances. So luckily we stopped that in its tracks, and that was the end of that. But we fought against the curfew regulations. We fought against this the ban on religious gatherings and various other regulations. And we've learned quite a few lessons during these court cases. I mean, this was a new type of court case for Afriforum as well. It's the first time that we've had to perform these kind of duties during a state of disaster, and we've learned a few lessons. Among other things, that a lot of people were panicky. That includes judges as well. So people weren't always sure whether the decisions they were making were going to have long-term effects on South Africa's health situation or on people's lives. But bearing that in mind, I think the time is perfect now, because our legal arguments and our papers will be filed before the end of the month. Is very straightforward. In order to enact a state of disaster, there needs to be some kind of an emergency. Currently, there's no emergency, so there's no need for a state of disaster.
Absolutely. And you raised this in a very important context. Dumo, let me come to you, and then Joe, very briefly. There's something to be said here, chaps, about as I think Piet, as Gabriel, and as Jacques have laid it out. There simply is no rationale, for a lockdown. Again, let's not go back in history. There's a different discussion to be had around should we have gone into lockdown or not. I don't want to prosecute that issue now. I'm talking about in the here and now. The ongoing rationale for a lockdown, for a state of disaster, for the appropriating of so much power into the hands of a few elites, but these lefties themselves might call a vanguard, because that's ultimately what they're modeling themselves onto. It's that Marxist idea that somehow there should be a small elite from the quote-unquote proletariat who form what Marx called the vanguard of the proletariat, in this case a national coronavirus command council, because that's what they've shaped themselves or modeled themselves against, Dumo. But again, there's a broader ideological battle here that most people tend to forget as they get dribbled in the here and now.
Right. I think a lot of people. Oh, thanks for that, Sihle. But I think a lot of people have are in a position where they're so used to the lockdown, they think that if it ends, then things will get worse. So I think that's the narrative that needs to be defeated. But a nice comment there from Graham. But I think ultimately the rationale for the lockdown, there isn't one. I think you can all see that a lot of people are not following regulations. People are not wearing masks. They even ended the curfew and so forth. And people they just don't care anymore. So I think we need to take that into consideration. And also, as a libertarian, I don't think that the lockdown is a good thing, because what it does, it takes a lot of rights away from citizens, and when those rights are taken away, that becomes a problem. So I think that freedom is an important as an important value to protect, and the lockdown actually undermines that. So I think that one could argue from, let's say, from circumstances and also from an ideological perspective that the lockdown is not needed. But of course, this serves the ANC. They love power. They're going to try and find every reason to hold on to that power. And and I think that's what we're seeing right now. Because even the state of disaster, I mean, they could have let it lapse, but they didn't. They sent in an extension last minute, and there's no need for it, really. But that's what we have right now, and I hope the legal challenges will actually end the lockdown, or rather say the state of disaster, very soon.
Absolutely. I must come to you then, Joe. You made the point in the comment section, really, that it really, I mean, I've called it the COVID grift on the show so many times because to a large extent, it is a grift. It is people who, on the one hand, are swindling you in order to appropriate for themselves either a power or, in some cases, actual cash. There are people, firms, government officials, and the like who have been making money hand over fist, in some case, simply because it was convenient to keep people in the stasis, if you will, of the fear of this virus. It's actually been quite appalling to witness.
Yeah, just this past week, SA to get $750 million World Bank loan to boost economic recovery and to help with social, I don't know what and what and what, all those keywords that we keep on hearing about. I mean, there you have it right there, $750 million, not rand, dollars. It's right here, $750 million. Can anyone fathom how much that is in rand? And this is what's all been about, guys. When you talk about vaccines and all that, and I know I have to be very careful when I start speaking about this on YouTube, but I can say this, is that big pharmaceutical companies are winning big time, and definitely the politicians. No matter which side you stand on, for vaccine, not for vaccine, mandatory vaccine, which I'm definitely against, and I agree with a lot of what Gabriel says when it comes to mandatory vaccines and everybody else on this panel. But the point is this, and I think Ramon Kabanak covered it in a Morning Shot episode where he was able to show that if you follow the money, all of this will make sense. And I've held that position for a very long time. This is nothing but a money-making grift, this entire thing. And I think hopefully the ANC is feeling the pressure now. I mean, there's a headline this morning released that Cyril apparently is feeling pressure to lift the lockdown. And, I can't believe some of the stuff they said in that article, but they're still hesitant to do so, even though one of the ministers quoted saying that if they went to court, they would lose. The ANC would lose the case. They know they would lose. If IRR takes them to court, if Sakeliga takes them to court, Afriforum takes them to court, they will lose. They know the jig is up. It's time to end this lockdown, man. That's all I got to say.
Absolutely. Nolu, let me come to you, and then I'll go full circle back to Piet. Nolu, this lockdown, I think because two questions I want to pose to you. I posted on social media that God bless my township of Mlazi and where my farm is in rural KZN, because any notion of a state of disaster, any notion of a lockdown, any notion of various regulations such as putting a mask on simply do not exist there. In fact, the quote I said, which triggered so many people, is that here in Mlazi, if you are in some sort of official demand, someone put a mask on, whether they're walking to a mall or in the streets or whatever the case may be, you have a very strong chance of catching a varm PK, since I can't say the word here on YouTube. People are at that point where there'll be violence actually enacted on you for trying to enforce what these politicians have shoved down the throats of often people who are much poorer, much more vulnerable than they are. There's a frustration, a palpable frustration at these lockdowns because they've killed so much of an economy for them. And that's the story we've almost forgotten in this whole matter. It's the poor, invariably, who have suffered the most. And even as Joe very quickly raises the issue of this new loan that the ANC government has now received to fight the pandemic or the spicy cough, this money is going to be paid by someone. And that someone is you and me.
Yeah, true. I spent my holidays at home, and I so happened to be from a township. it was such a bliss to be here, to be there, sorry. And I think for me, it felt so good. I was quite surprised that how come people from the township understand it better than I do, that I can get into a taxi, do whatever I want to do, and nobody really cares. So for me in that one, I really felt good because I felt people, they have more understanding and, they understand that this will all get. I was able to attend, functions, anything as we call them. Nothing, and not to say that people are careless, but I think people have realized that this is part of us and we need to move on with our lives. So for me, I just feel that in the townships, people have more sense than in the burbs, for obvious reasons, of course. And for me, what still pains me is the fact that people, they can't imagine their lives without being in the lockdown. Some people, they are so hell-bent in just being in this lockdown, forgetting what damage it has done already. For instance, this week and last week, kids went back to school. It's 42, 34 degrees, and kids, they still need to put on this freaking mask for no goddamn reason. It's children, for crying out loud, and it's so hot. I feel like it's abuse. I'm so glad I'm not a parent yet because there's no child of mine who'd wear that nonsense, And I just find it quite bizarre that parents are going to stand up for this because it's wrong. And I just saw just recently that it has delayed the speech of children, this whole thing of masks, because they learn how to speak from when they see us, our mouth moving as adults. So with all of that, I know there's a myriad of other things that this whole thing has impacted, But I think for me, already, I'm so done with it. And so much that I just keep on just fighting the whole thing of the mask. And I just want us to go back to, I don't want to say normality, but to just, can I get done with masks? Can I get done with lockdowns? Because they are over right now. And if parents also can stand up at schools, because we needed all these pockets of spaces that we can fight with the power that we have, just rally around and say no more. We don't need them anymore. It's a lot. So yeah.
Absolutely. And maybe, as I said, Peter, it has to come full circle back to you, therefore, because you can hear it, I think, across this panel as people bring in their various experiences. There is a spirit of resistance that has developed in this country, very palpable, especially for those of us who are in those spaces that are not paid attention to by the mainstream or formal South Africa. One of the things I said on social media also this week was, people need not necessarily fear mandates by the state insofar as, there is a booming informal sector in this country that has burgeoned, that's developed, that clearly there are millions of South Africans who are able to, on a daily basis, build an income, live in that informal space, and even create wealth in those informal spaces. Because I think there are millions of South Africans who have realized what maybe those of us in the middle class and the elites of formal South Africa don't realize yet, which is we don't actually need the state. The state plays an important role, of course, in its limited sense, when it is limited to what it should be its roles. But in real terms, there can and there could very well be a culture developed from this, where people realize we don't need to go to the state for everything.
Yeah, Sakeliga, I think that's the future in South Africa. We can lament state failure, or we can see it as an opportunity. I do not say this lightly. I think state failure and increasing state failure is inevitable in South Africa. Now, if there's a secret to be discovered in this, if we discover the secret, we can use that state failure to turn around the fortunes, not only for ourselves, because it's not a private matter, but for our communities and those around us. That secret is that state failure leaves a vacuum, a power vacuum that you so aptly described in Umlazi, where the irrational obligations the state tries to enforce are simply letters on some paper somewhere in the union buildings. It is of no consequence. And right through these past 2 years, we've seen actually many instances of that. And this is not to say that resistance or non-compliance should be taken lightly. There may very well be consequences, and people who seek to act wisely do this cautiously. And so you won't hear me be very disparaging about people who do comply. But even though I think that there are risk factors, just as we say, let's decentralize risk management, we must also have some respect for people who feel they have to comply or not. But certainly from Sakeliga's side, and I think this is what we're encouraging, is to seek to uphold laws that are really important, Those laws, typically, you can call them laws of nature or laws of God or some other thing, but the source of these promulgations, they're not law. They're merely legislation. Friedrich Hayek made a very good distinction between law and legislation. Legislation it does not have the same status and does not necessarily require the same respect. And in practice, that's precisely what we've seen. And so I think that we're doing good work. Jacques at Afriforum, Gabriel, other big groups are doing really great work. The really greatest work of all are done by the people who hold the church service, even though they're told not to, or who do what they think is right in a responsible manner. Not throw off all authority, but question the authority in a manner that seeks to apply that judgment wisely. There's not an easy answer to this. I think the greatest people this whole past 2 years are people who've went and made do and done what they thought best, even if some minister told them not to buy warm chicken.
Absolutely. Maybe at that point, let me just quickly remind everybody as we near the halfway mark of the show, you are watching Liberty and Friends. My name is Sikhle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty, in the house tonight, and you can see the house is packed. Dumo Denga, the host of the ManPatria podcast. There is Joe Emilio, host of the Joe Emilio Show. Make sure you like and subscribe on his socials too. Nolu, Maki, entrepreneur extraordinaire from the battle out in the Western Cape. Woo! Is it not hot in that part of the world right now? And of course, Gabriel, Crouse, there he is, head of campaigns at the Institute of Race Relations. You'll also find him on his podcast, one part of the duo at the two crickets in a thorn tree. And of course, there he is in the middle, Jacques, Broodryk from Afriforum. Him and I are someone who we've been doing a lot of chatting in the background. Who knows, some very exciting things might be coming out of there. And last but not least, Piet Roux from Sakeliga. He is, of course, the head honcho at Sakeliga. He is the CEO and who may, I must quickly say, have to leave us at some point, but he's graciously given us some extra time. Welcome to it. We're at the halfway mark. Guys, I'm going to move us on a little bit onto the next topic, albeit it's a little linked, but we won't spend too long on this one. We've been lamenting the state of South Africa when it comes to these various lockdowns, states of disasters, and the like. But there seems to be a mixed bag of responses worldwide. The UK, for instance, have basically said, okay, that's it. Bojo appearing before his house of House of Commons, the Parliament, and basically said, yeah, guys, that's it. We're lifting all of these restrictions, bar a few here and there. But in reality, a lot of these NPIs, these non-pharmaceutical interventions, we're simply not going to enforce using state violence, or the threat, at least, of state violence anymore. Let me throw it to you, Jacques, because I think you may have tweeted something along to this, in response to this, pardon me, but maybe just quickly unpack your thoughts around this. When you then look at the UK example versus, for instance, in terms of the English-speaking parts of the world, let me be quite specific in where I want to focus here. The UK versus Canada versus the US, and really versus Australia and New Zealand. What is going on, Jacques?
Sisha, I have to be off. Gentlemen, Jacques, I have to just say goodbye. It was great chatting. I have another obligation. Speak again. Goodbye, everyone.
Pete, thank you so much. Super appreciate it. And of course, it's Piet Roux, CEO of Sakeliga. Jacques, your thoughts here, dude. Are we basically seeing the unraveling of those parts of the world really that used to belong to the British Empire?
Yeah, that's a very good question, man, and it's a very worrying topic that you've raised. I mean, if you look at countries like Australia and Canada, which used to be these golden boy countries, prime examples of democracy and freedom and liberty, and what they've turned into now, police states where elderly citizens are dragged from shops and abused because they don't have their vax passports. It's absolutely insane what's happening there. Was it Emmanuel Macron the other day? We referred to non-vaccinated people as non-citizens. I mean, that's absolutely insane. How did we get there in 2 years' time? That a country like France will call their own citizens non-citizens for not complying with, and let's call it what it is, and it's an experimental procedure. It should be a free choice thing. So it's very scary. If you look at the UK situation, for instance, that's also a whole different debate, because we know that Boris Johnson is getting a lot of pressure because of those parties they held during the first lockdown. So this might be a a career-saving move for him. It might not necessarily be an indication of what is to follow in other British-speaking or English-speaking countries or other European countries, but I certainly hope so. But I think another thing that we do need to bear in mind, like even in the South African context, so we're very focused on gaining momentum to fight this lockdown and get it ended, but it's not going to end there. If you look at the government's own reasons that they gave the last time they extended this state of disaster, they said they needed to extend it once more to buy time to adjust existing legislation and laws to complement and implement COVID regulations. And that is extremely concerning. So they want to change existing laws to make this a permanent thing. And that's something we're definitely going to have to watch very, very carefully. So it's good that we're fighting this state of disaster. It's nonsense. It's an abuse of power. They're looting the country dry. But I think the ANC has got to something bigger at play here.
Absolutely. Yes, Dumo. Milton Friedman once said, there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. And we're definitely seeing that in this modern age, are we not? Where, for instance, I made the argument in a previous episode of the BDL show that what may actually be at the genesis of them postponing or adding another month to the state of disaster in terms of here in South Africa is perhaps a strategy to buy time, to see what measures from the state of disaster they can actually endure and keep going beyond, its promulgation. Your thoughts on this before I move on to Gabriel?
Yeah, I think Milton Friedman was 110% correct there. The reality is that when governments introduce these programs, they meant to operate in perpetuity, and as a result of that, they can hold on to certain powers. And I think they've realized that during the lockdown, there were certain powers that they enjoyed in this, and if they had to end the state of disaster, they're probably discussing among themselves, saying, well, which powers can we keep? But I think ultimately, I don't know if it's actually going to end up being permanent, but the reasons for having those particular powers will have to be argued for. I don't know how they're going to adjust that legislation. I don't know if it's going to pass through Parliament or something like that. But even if it does pass through Parliament, it can still be challenged in court anyway, and then it can be declared probably unconstitutional ultimately. So, and we saw with the Arto Act as well, there are some judges in the system who haven't been captured. So I think that even if they try to go down that route, they are going to meet a lot of resistance along the way. And also remember, we had the July riots as well. So if people find out that the state of disaster ended, but the government can still do things that can still perform actions that they could under the state of disaster, I don't think people will be happy about that as well. So there's a lot going on, but I do definitely agree that there are powers that the government seeks to keep hold of after the state of disaster ends, and it just confirms what Milton Friedman states.
And maybe with that being said, Gabriel, I'm going to pivot a little bit and introduce that other topic that I wanted us to look at, which actually has some link, I suppose, to the spicy cough, because at least one province used the spicy cough as a reason for why they achieved such dismal Matric results for 2021. That was Limpopo, of course, with a paltry 66%. 66.7% pass rate, and their MEC basically saying, well, it's because of the spicy cough that we find ourselves in this position. The national pass rate, of course, having been 76.4%. But an argument can be made here, Gabriel, that actually these numbers are actually relatively, in a grand scheme of a broader argument, pretty irrelevant, because there's some really important things that we're missing when it comes to the Matric results. Your guys over there at the CRA did some great work in this regard. One of those stats which really scares me is the number of pupils who, having started grade 1 to the point of grade 12, just disappear from the system.
Yeah, this was something that Dr. Frans Cronje, former CEO of the IRR, spent many years promulgating and getting it to the point where independent newspapers were then finally publishing this kind of thing of their own accord, so that it becomes more common sense, so that we don't get dribbled. I think it's a very good phrase that you used there, Sitle.
Mm-hmm.
We as adults also need to educate ourselves, which means finding the relevant information and seeing how you can take a Matric pass rate of 50%, and it's like, well, what's really going on here? Well, you've made pass mean 30%, so that's already changing things. But more than anything, you've helped people drop out of school before they've gotten there. So we don't have the numbers yet for this year because it takes a little bit of a while to track through. But we'll have them out in the next couple of days. But I can tell you from 2020, 2021, you basically you have less than 5% of grade ones starting 12 years ago. If you take the grade 1 class of 2008 and you track it through to Matric in 2020, less than 5% of them are passing with good enough maths to do anything quantitative at university, and less than 10% of them are passing with anything that can qualify them even to go to a technicon. You have most people dropping out before they get to Matric. And then you've got a 50% pass rate of those who've made it. So it's like a 25% pass rate on the 30% pass, like a 12%, less than 10% genuine university exemption, and less than 5%. In fact, in 2019, when I first did the data, we had at about 2.7% passing with a Matric maths pass. That's less than 3 in 100. It's quite. It makes me upset sometimes to think about it. It sometimes feels like an impossible issue to tackle. It's not. It's very natural for people to take care of children. It's one of the things that behavioral psychologists have found you hardly need to teach. You know, there's some things with motherhood and fatherhood where you can get a bit of a pointer. But a lot of it is just so natural. It's so natural to try and take care of young children. And in South Africa, we abuse young children systematically. Those stats are describing a systemic abuse, if anything is. And it needs to be undone. A lot of it is, unfortunately, because of SATU, protecting teachers to the point where you can have Puza Thursday, so you don't show up on Friday, you don't show up on Monday because you still got Babalas Sunday. And the absenteeism rates, I mean, there really is no other country that has teacher absenteeism like we do. How do you deal with a problem where this statist kind of system is getting in the way of something so natural? You give parents the right to choose. So basically, it costs the government about 2,000 Rand per pupil per month to send a kid to school. And that most of that money is just being poured like water into the desert sand. It's not getting to the kids. There are low-cost private schools in this country that are getting great results on 2,000 Rand a month per pupil. So you say to parents, this is a voucher from the government for 2,000 Rand. If you take your kids out of the government school, you can go and redeem this voucher at any private school for 2,000 Rand. And if you need a bit of a top-up, you can top it up yourself. If the school will take it at that, you go to that school. And then you can... This has been tried in America, in several countries in Europe. It's been tried in India. It's been tried in Nigeria. It's been tried in South Sudan. It's been tried in the Cameroon. It's been tried in, I think, Papua New Guinea or Guinea-Bissau or Equatorial Guinea. I didn't do geography in high school, so I can't remember the difference between those three. But it's been tried in more and more African countries. Everywhere it's being tried, the results are flabbergasting. I mean, this is something Thomas Sowell was talking about in the American context for so many decades. And it's really something that the IRA has been talking about in the South African context. And we're delivering a report to the Department of Health. Our colleagues at the Freedom Action Network, FAN, who we should check out, headed up by Herman Pretorius, they're doing good work on this as well. But the thing is, we need to unlock that potential and stop the child abuse that is government education in this country. And this is a sobering time to think about it, because the problem that you create when you crush a person's intellectual and discipline growth, especially for men. I was a young man. I was unemployed for a time. It makes for a lot of anger. It's dangerous. Young unemployed men are dangerous, and the best way to deal with that danger is to give people skills and discipline. So that they can get a job and then learn skills on the job. Anyway, so I think we've got a solution. I think it's really not complicated. It's difficult, but it's not complicated. And the difficulty is in getting the union buildings, in getting the Department of Education and Jimuseka and company to see reason, and getting the unions off the bus a little bit on this one.
Absolutely. Nolu, I must come to you because there's a point that Gabriel raises there, and it's something that we sometimes forget because we get lost a little bit in the hype of, oh, look at these top achieving students. Ooh, so and so. Ooh, they're going to Harvard now. It's going to be lovely. And Angie Mozeha gets to stand on stage. Does she still have that mole in Tumpa that everybody sort of fixates on? And I used to always ask the question, is that mole also going to Harvard too? Anyway, my bad. But we get sort of dribbled and lost in the distractions of it all. But the reality of the matter is, for the overwhelming majority of mostly poor, and I must say it, poor Black students in particular, their future is very grim because the opportunities beyond what were a poor set of matric results for them. If you're someone who, let's say, passed in inverted commas with all 33% in every subject, your prospects, generally speaking, are very poor. And it's those chaps who Gabriel is rightly pointing out that I know you and I, in our respective townships, I know we see them every day on the street corner, that chap who just simply languishes and then falls into a life of crime.
True. And I think for me, what I'm sad about whenever matric results they are published, it's always the boy child, because they're the ones who are lagging behind. And as Gabriel said, they're the ones that become very dangerous for our society. Our township are full of them. We are scared of them. And for me, when I was at home, I nearly cried with what happened to the boy child, the ones I grew up with, even the ones that are, the younger ones. They are so lost. They don't have much to do. And I think, also to be fair, there are so many FET colleges that the government has created, which I think even if you do have, let's say, a low pass mark, that you can go and find or do a skill there, And I think maybe companies should bring back as well those, they call it an internship, of course, but then I think there's one word for it, apprenticeship, of course.
Apprenticeships.
Yes, I think we should really go back to that, especially for the boy child. There's just something going on, which I think it's ticking time bomb. We've seen it, of course, the July riots, and we see them all the time having an excuse to really complete or to finish school. I have relatives of mine that I had to fight and say, "You're gonna finish school. Come rain, come sunshine." There's this thing that happens where they just lose the I'd say maybe the motivation to finish school. I don't know what happens, especially in the Black society, and of course the lack of fathers and all other factors into it. But I think for me there are so many things that the government has put in place to really help them have a better future. Not all of them, of course, will go to varsity. Not all of them want to go to varsity for that matter. But at the same time, there are other plan Bs and Cs that the government has created, which they can really foster a better tomorrow for them. So I'm really for the vouchers and all other programs that we can have, but currently it's not working. It's just demoralizing, and it's not bettering our generation and our future children. And I think there's something more that needs to be said. And for me, I think the attention should be on the boy child. I just want to stress. So that's just how I feel about them. And also to come back to those who are going to Harvard, I've just been seeing a lot of hate when it comes to the private sector, because our government should really just to be the one to understand that when you do pay for education, there's more that you're going to get from it by paying and when it's private. And really, you will get to be better in your results. So for me, I just think that even that we can't really hate on that part. They've worked hard, they've paid the money, the resources, and yeah, man, that's all I can say now.
Joe, let me come to you, and I want to bring it back to Jacques in a moment. Jacques, I crossed my wires as to which organization you're from. For a moment, I actually thought you're from Solidarity, because why I wanted to raise that is Solidarity, they've invested mega when it comes to the issue of preparing young men and women with those hard skills which the economy is demanding. Those what we used to call hand skills in Zulu. As we say in Zulu, artisans, effectively. Massive investment in that regard, because there's a recognition by them at Solidarity that is the future of this country, insofar as getting those young people who don't make it into university and the like into something which a trade, of course, that gives them those hard skills. Jacques, Joe, I'll come to you in a moment.
Yeah, no, I mean that's definitely government closed down all the technical trade schools, or they just let them slip into disarray and decay. And that's why Solidarity saw that there was a big opportunity there, and they started up Soltech, which is a trade school. This country has so much potential. We have so many people with so much potential. People just need access to training and quality training. And unfortunately, government's not going to offer that. They're not doing what they're supposed to. So it's up to the private sector and to civil society to step in and make that happen.
Absolutely. Joe, again, even as I come to you, and you'll be the final comment on this before we move on to our next topic, because we've just hit that 9 p.m. mark. We're in the last 30 minutes of tonight's episode of Liberty and Friends, in conversation with Dumo, Denga from the ManPatria show, Jacques, Broodryk from Afriforum, Gabriel Crouse from IR, Nolu, Maki, entrepreneur and social and political commentator, and of course, Joe Emilio, who I'm posing this question to now. Joe, it does seem like, and again, there's an unofficial consensus here, if you really listen to what's being said on this panel, that actually, of those people who are poor, of course, we're not saying that, remove the state from all things education, leave them to their own devices. It seems that the consensus here on this group is actually remove the state insofar as it providing the service directly, and instead place the power and the resources into the hand of a parent for them to choose where their child goes to get an education by way of an education voucher. And of course, at a tertiary level, a return to that insistence of priming your economy off of an artisan basis. Artisans who are the people who drive an industrial basin. That surely should be the policy response we see here.
Yeah, it should be, but it's not. I personally think the ANC loves its poor population. It loves keeping people ignorant. It loves keeping people uneducated, because an uneducated vote is a vote for the ANC. It's as simple as that. And that's why the education system is failing miserably, and obviously because of the cater deployment and every cater trying to get their hands on the piece of the pie. I 100% am behind the voucher idea. I think everyone on this panel is 100% correct. I think we should back in the parents, but you know what, the ANC is not going to do it, and that's just the reality. And it boggles my mind how some people still try to defend the ANC, like, oh, they're trying or whatever. But Solidarity, creating colleges, and Afriforum also creating like institutions, doing it themselves. And I think that's what we also have to get used to at some point.
That's right.
We have to start taking it into our own hands as communities grow, find like-minded people and build it ourselves. Kind of sound like Biden's phrase there for a moment, build back better, but I'm not going in that direction. I'm saying communities need to get together, decentralize themselves, because no one else is going to do it for you. Find people, build it yourself. Take back the power of water. Man. Take back the power of electricity. Take back the power. Build it yourselves. We can do it. It can be done. If you need to get other organizations and advocates on your side, there's a lot of civil society groups that are going to be behind you. You raise a bit of funds and you make it happen. It can be done. People are doing it as we speak. Sikhle, you and I have seen it ourselves. Absolutely. And I want to jump in on that point, because that will be the theme of 2022 for me. Now, for me, here on the BDL show, busy right now with the fundraising in the background for what will be a Mazakele campaign. I know we have spoken about that. Mazakele being a Zulu word for build it yourself or do it yourself. I am looking to do exactly that and inspire South Africans to do exactly that by traveling the length and the breadth of this country, showcasing those South Africans in all 9 provinces who have literally said enough with waiting on the state, enough with government dependency. We will build it ourselves. And it's those stories which I will bring you here on the BDL show. That will be my special project this year, literally working in the background to get guys who are willing to fund this particular project. So please hold thumbs for me in that regard. And speaking about holding thumbs, guys, hey, tada, we're running out of time here, and there are a few topics that I want us to chew on. In particular, one
non-apology. This is the penultimate issue that we're going to chew on tonight. The last two, it's Usisulu, and this weird apologize, but she doesn't apologize because the president said I apologize, but now he's saying he stands by the apology. Gabriel, an absolute clown show of a situation, but again, a clown show of a situation, but again, it comes down to a president who is losing control of various factions in his own party.
Dude, it's hilarious. He's standing by the apology she did not make.
Voila.
It's amazing. Okay, I want to say a couple of things about this. Firstly, there's very good news in this story. The good news is as follows. If you read that article and the follow-up article, Lindiwe Sisulu said nothing that has not been said before. She said colonialism is terrible and the rule of law, and it's a construct that's been invented by, it's all white mischief, it's white magic, and it's holding our people back. And the solution is going to be to just break the rules and do it in a very African way. African rule breaking for African problems. This was the mantra of the Rhodes Must Fall movement. This was the heart of the ideological argument being made for expropriation without compensation. This is what every Umrabulo discussion document that the ANC has produced in the last 50 years says. This is in the, it's not even as extreme as when Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma said, what we might need is a little bit of class suicide, Cabral-esque class suicide in the command card. This is, okay, so the first thing is it's very unusual. It's very normal. What's unusual is no one's defending her. In fact, the usual suspects who say, it is true. Like the rule of law is like it's colonial construct. It's terrible. Maybe you shouldn't burn down the library. Maybe you should, but they try and make apologies for it. Are not making apologies for it. They've been attacking her. So that's different. I think that those guys, the Eusebius Makaisers of the world, they can feel the sea change. They can feel that this thing of race solidarity, rather than treating people like people, and people who are working while you work together, people who are eating the money, you put them in jail. Like that, those are two different worldviews. The one, and you can see people are sick of that thing of everyone who looks alike thinks alike and must stick together. That thing is not worked. It's never going to work, and people are getting sick of it. The second thing to say, Ramaphosa is the head of the radical economic transformation faction of the ANC. Radical economic transformation, I know it's a controversial thing to say. Everyone acts as if it's like the Ramaphosa faction against the RET faction. No, it's the Ramaphosa faction against the Zuma faction. If you want to use RET, that must describe Ramaphosa. Ramaphosa economic transformation. He pushed expropriation without compensation. The most radical, that is the most RET thing. When the ANC was talking about RET under Thabo Mbeki, and you will find that they were talking about RET under Thabo Mbeki, they said we should do expropriation without compensation. Then they said that is too radical. Wasn't too radical for Cyril. NHI, prescribed assets, the discussion about nationalizing the reserve bank, that has all been under Ramaphosa, under his leadership, under his call, with his cabinet deployees. So it's not a matter of RET faction. The ANC has never been more united about policy. There's nothing they disagree about on policy, but they disagree on personnel. And the third point, and I'll finish on this very briefly, there is something amazing. Guys, if you want to amaze yourself, read page 796 of the Zondo report. Because this has not been covered anywhere in the media. But it is, Zondo came afterwards and kind of spanked Sisulu metaphorically, saying, if you're going to say just because I'm black that I've been infected with a white virus in my mind because I'm a justice, then let me tell you, you're violating your oath of office, which is to defend the Constitution. I thought he was very, very good in that clapback to Sisulu, and patient and so on. But if you really want to see an amazing clapback to the ANC, read page 796, where the Zondo report basically gives a systemic analysis of what caused state capture, and it is, in short, BEE. He says that the law has been created in such a confusing fashion. There are two obligations in the Constitution, Section 217, that he cites. One is you must get the best value for money when you're spending the people's money. The other one is you can't let that get in the way of transformation through race, okay? Then he says the problem is the law can't decide which one is more important. Many laws are saying, no, the race thing is much more important. Never mind about the value for money. And that's getting people confused. So half the time, people are breaking procurement policies. Then other laws are saying you must get value for money. They don't know what to do. Half the time, people are breaking the law by accident. But the other half the time, they're eating the money in this fog where you can't see who's breaking the law and who's not breaking the law because of the confusion that's been created. He says, what's the solution? You must say which one is primary and which one is an afterthought. The primary one, he says, must be value for money. If two companies are offering a product at the same price, at the same rate, with the same stability, then maybe you can choose the government, because of our constitution, the way it's written, is obliged to prefer the black company. But if Whitey is offering it for R5 cheaper, you must buy it from Whitey because it's the people's money, all of our money, a very diverse group of people in a very poor country that cannot afford to waste any money or create any perverse incentives. It's an amazing analysis. It sounds very much like Dr. Anthea Jeffrey to me. She's been, you can read BE Helping or Hurting. She wrote it in 2015. It's an amazingly well-researched, disciplined, erudite book. And Zondo is just kind of distilling some of those very key arguments in a very sober, very clinical way, tethering it right to our constitution. And it is not covered anywhere in our fantastic media. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. And it doesn't mean that he's not still sitting there and that we can't use that. And it's very exciting to me.
There's a strong reason why it won't be covered in this media. This media, of course, is the very same that in an ideological level, at the very least, would back something like a BEE because it's told that it's pro-black, and for fear, of course, of not sounding like you stand with black people, they would never be the sort of people who would then criticize something like BEE. Dumo, I must come to you, and then I'll sort of I'll touch on the rest of the guys, but really I want us to move on to that last topic. Yes, Dumo, there's something very hilarious in this Sisulu matter, in the sense that here's a woman who says, well, I didn't apologize for what I said about the Constitution. I said it. It's trash is essentially what she's suggesting. But she conveniently omits to mention that she has been a minister in this government enabled by this Constitution, drawing a fat salary for the past 27 plus years, empowered by the very same Constitution. If she really stood on the principle that this Constitution is trash, why have we not seen a resignation from Mulindiwe Sisulu?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. And I think the reason why we didn't see that resignation, because the money was good. The money was excellent. I mean, she was been in like almost every ministry. And I remember one person was saying that, like, has she even worked a proper, honest job in her life? And some have even stated that, look, she's the type of individual that made it because of her surname, and and I think that actually helped her out as well. So the reality is that now, I think she is riding on the public's ignorance. She's hoping that the public is as ignorant as she thinks they are, because anyone who's just followed her history would see that what she's saying now is totally ridiculous. I mean, again, if really the Constitution did not work for black people, well, I mean, weren't you an MP at some point? Why didn't you vote for all these changes to the Constitution that would have, at least in your mind, help black people, do better and stuff like that? Not that there is one. I don't think there is one. There's no law that you can put in. It's just up to, leadership and stuff like that. But she hasn't done that. So I just think that now she's coming out. I think there's an elective conference this year for the ANC. So I think she's trying to put her name in the hat. And the best way to do it is to pull up all these talking points about, the Constitution not working and stuff like that. Zuma did the same thing in 2009, and now she's doing it as well. And she's hoping that if she can take something out of the Zuma playbook and implement it, perhaps she could end up being the president of the ANC. So I think, in my opinion, Sisulu's just really taken a chance and hoping that she can actually become the president at some point.
Oh. Guys, final word before I have us move on. Joe, let me come to you. Again, that hypocrisy for me remains a rather delicious one, because you hear it also from the radical economic transformation lot, who rail against this constitution. But then if you were to say something along the lines of, well, actually, leave aside Sisulu for a moment. Let's look at certain pieces of legislation, which this constitution, whether you agree with it or not, is not the issue. The point is it has enabled things like affirmative action or employment equity, or black economic empowerment and the like. The very things that they will clap on and, much like SEAL, say, oh, this is fantastic, throw me a fish for this particular idea, but say nothing about those parts of their ideas, pardon me, which correction, sorry, I got trapped by my own sentence construction there. Let me rephrase that question. You have a situation where the same people who push toxic ideas through the same constitution, and in fact, you'll hear them say this constitution enables it, then suddenly saying, oh, that same constitution is trash, it's limiting.
Yeah, it's a back and forth. I really believe that this is all a psyop. I think that this is just a theater, and I believe it was Shakespeare who said, the world is a stage. And boy, this story is really becoming that. It's a distraction. It's a distraction from other things that are happening. I honestly haven't paid it too much attention. I've read a few articles here and there. I think some of the stuff she said is true. And I think a lot of people will agree with what she had to say. Maybe not everything, but she's calling it out. And then for Cyril to say what he said, and then she comes out and says, no, I didn't. I mean, good on her to stick to her guns and challenge the president. At least someone needs to. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't like any of the ANC, not one member in the ANC, minister or otherwise. But I'm just saying that this is all, it just feels like Dumo said, it's a lead up to the presidential, elections in the ANC, and this is all theater. That's really all I have to say about it. And the ANC will keep on distracting us from the failed state that they are responsible for.
Twitch, maybe Jacques, you have the final word then on this topic before we move on. And again, I want to be a little broad here. For me, there's nothing more amusing than watching this gaggle of political elites sit in their comfy, cozy little spots, drawing a salary from the very thing that they criticize as being toxic and terrible and catastrophic and blah, blah, blah. They themselves passing bad ideas enabled by this constitution that, on the one hand, they claim, they affect that is in service of Black people, but in real terms, in other words, the intention they'll posit is, oh, this is pro-Black, this is for Black people, uplift them, blah, blah, blah. But in real terms, when you look at the outcomes, does the exact opposite of that. Then they'll turn around, Jacques, and look at an organization like Afriforum, for example, when it then does, as you guys do, the advocacy work, and you literally put your money, so to speak, where your mouth is in supporting, whether it's a Black community, a Afrikaner community, a colored community, or whatever the case may be, not because you do it on the basis of their race, but you do it on the basis of an issue that is brought to you, whether it's the Senzo Meyiwa, pardon me, case, the South African footballer who was murdered, and to this day, after many promises by Begekele, there's no justice for him, whether it's a farming community in somewhere in need of one service or the other. Afriforum stands up, assists, and then those same politicians who claim to stand for Black people say, oh, how dare Afriforum do this, or how dare Afriforum do that. We're the ones, we're the sole arbiters of what is good for Black folk in this country, because the Constitution, pardon me, enables us as a minister of this or a government of that. It's that hypocrisy, pardon me, Jacques, which I really find rather hilarious.
Yeah, well, no one likes to be upstaged, basically. And obviously, it's a touchy thing for the ANC if an organization such as Afriforum, who is also so proudly Afrikaans and not sure of their identity, gets things done. I can understand that it's a sore issue for them, but they need to let go of those egos and start doing the work, because they're not. I found Lindiwe Sisulu's opinion piece very, very entertaining. I found it infuriating for a minute, and then I found it very comical because she's describing caviar parties and living cadres living these lavish lifestyles, and she's describing it 100% correct because that's the life that she has been living. And now she wants to come out and criticize people about it. I find that very, very ironic, but apologies. I think Joe's correct. I think this is leading up towards some internal ANC politics. Ramaphosa has never been in control of these factions. We know it was a very close race in the last election. He narrowly beat NDZ. So those factions have been at each other's throats ever since, and we see that the results of that in service delivery and corruption and the lack of government accountability. So let's hope that they can sort each other out and the party crumbles in its totality.
Okay. With that being said, let me move from one political clown to another, one Julius Malema, who this week took on a very interesting, we've spoken a lot about hypocrisy here on the show. When it comes to the EFF leader, the Economic Freedom Fighters leader, one Julius Malema, a flip-flopper of note. Gabriel, here's someone who just a few days ago, would have told you something along the lines of, South Africa is an African country. It should be open borders. All Africans are welcome here. They should come here. This thing of shunning fellow Africans, treating them as quote-unquote foreigners is alien. It's what the evil white man and his borders in Africa has introduced to us. And then you literally have that same Julius Malema take to the streets of Johannesburg, or really to the restaurants, high end, because again, I suppose that is his home. That's where he wines and dines his folks, champagne commie that he is. Takes to the restaurants and says, actually, show me your papers. Where are the foreigners here? I want to see them right now. Pan-Africanism? What's that?
Yeah, it's like, dude, this guy, I remember him at the end of last year being asked, he was at a press conference and they said, are you a dictator of the party? He said, no, I'm not a dictator. One way you can tell I'm not a dictator is because we are a pan-Africanist party. We know that these borders in Africa are just a white colonial construct. It's more white magic, white mischief. We will never respect that. It must be open border, African United States of Africa. Only in that fashion can we overcome the imperialist forces of white monopoly capital. And if I ever deviate from that, my party will rip me down. They will take me away as leader of the party.
How many times did you watch that? You memorized the entire thing.
I filmed it. It was playing on the TV downstairs. Luckily, I had PVR, so I rewound it, and then I filmed it on my phone and watched it. I was amazed by it. And then he goes and does this. Dude, I think what's interesting about it is, in a sense, that we've always known that Malema is an important political figure because he holds a very extremist position. But I think the evidence coming in is that he is also a bit of a flip-flopper at the same time, that he's an extremist opportunist. Yeah. And that's a dangerous combination, but it's also, in a way, not a very sustainable formula for popularity. I think the EFF is in a bit of trouble.
Absolutely. And I must come back to you, Jacques, for a moment, and then Joe, because Joe did indicate something to me in the private messages. But, Jacques, I want to chew on this Pan-Africanism thing for a moment, because I've always said in my tweeting and the like, drawing on the history, South Africans sometimes politically have a goldfish memory. We just forget things and we pretend as if things never happened. I've always said, if you look at South African politics, Pan-Africanism and leftist Pan-Africanism at that is a non-starter. There have been in our history more radical leftist, red in tooth and claw communist Pan-Africanist parties, such as the PAC, AZAPO, the Zanyan movement of this and that, who disappeared from the ether. And if anything, the one thing Julius Malema did well at the beginning of his little project of EFF was to give those people who were lost to the political ether a home, a new brand, a new home, under the banner of the EFF, citing the EFF as being the new home for pan-Africanists. Now, here's that same EFF literally perhaps reading the mood in the country of a South African population, black, white, Indian, colored, who are deeply patriotic to a nation state called South Africa and do not entertain the notion of an open borders South Africa. Now, again, I'm not prosecuting that issue of whether there should or shouldn't be open borders. I'm just stating a kind of a South Africa that it is. And in that kind of a South Africa that it is, South Africans are very clear around the need for there to be borders and an immigration control.
Yeah, I think it's important to bear in mind that the EFF are political windsocks. They change direction as the tide changes. I can compare them to a piece of driftwood on the ocean without an anchor. And very, very well said, they are opportunists. And we've seen that Mr. Herman Mashaba and his party has made some headway with them taking a strong stance on secured borders and controlled immigration. And one can only think that they're just trying to hop on that bandwagon. But I think one of the things that was very important that we saw this week was that business owners really need to start standing up to this nonsense. We cannot have a little brown shirt terrorist group running around intimidating people where they have no right to go and inspect labor documents or demand anything from anybody. People need to stand up to that because they only have that power because people give it to them, and that cannot be tolerated.
Absolutely, Joe. That last point, absolutely critically important. People tend to forget that what the EFF did this week is actually violate people's personal details. On what basis can I now suddenly walk in and say, show me your papers, dear restaurant? How many foreigners are here? How many national South Africans are here, etc., etc.? It seems as though there's one set of rules for the EFF and a completely different one for us, the rest of us, as plebs.
Yeah. Look, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to have to say goodbye. But let me go on a bit of a rant if you don't mind. All right. So I made a video on this because I saw a headline saying that Julius literally said that he's going to go to other industries such as security industries, farms, you name it. And I was like, Julius doesn't have the authority to do this. He's not the labor minister. He's not the president. If he walks into your business, tell him to fuck off. Seriously. All right. People are so worried about getting canceled by the EFF. They're worried that the EFF is going to come and destroy their business. Guess what? Let them. Insurance will pay out, and then you get to prosecute the EFF, take them to court, sue them, whatever you need to do. There is other ways of fighting back. Julius has no authority to tell you how to run your business. That's number one. Number two, I mentioned this in the video. I go to a barber, all right? This guy only hires Egyptians or Middle Eastern, all right? Kind of ironic that I go there because I lived in Egypt for a while. But anyway, and he doesn't like, I think there's one black person there. I want to see Julius go to that barber and tell him about quotas and stuff like that. Because let me tell you, Middle Easterns are not going to stand for it. The Pakistanis that run their shops are not going to stand for it. And neither should Anglos in South Africa, because Afrikaners are not going to stand for it. I would love to see Julius go to a farm and speak to an Afrikaner. That's going to be one entertaining viral video. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, people of South Africa, do not be bullied by a fascist asshole, all right, who has no authority over your life whatsoever. We need to get out of this mentality that politicians are like kings and queens and they need to be respected. No. We pay for their salaries. They work for us, not the other way around. And South Africans need to remember that, and it needs to stick in their heads, and they need to digest that, believe that, live by it. All right. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much, Sakeliga, for having me on the show. I dropped some truth bombs and let the cancellation begin. Cheers.
But Nolu, even as Joe says this, and by the way, he's spot on in his analysis. And so far as saying, guys, at some stage, we need to actually rally together, South Africans, and stop fearing the political elites, whether they come to us in a fascistic, ultra-lefty format as Julius, or they come to us in any other guise. At some stage, we are stronger together, stronger as a society, when we actually stand together and defend each other's life, liberty, and property rights. Julius, I actually saw the clip, Nolu, when that one manager of Cream actually stood up to him initially and said, "No, Julius, on what basis are you here? Are you here as a parliamentarian? If so, what letter from Parliament sanctions you being here?" And then Julius, you could see in that moment, you could see he actually had to think of something rational in that moment, but all he could muster was to say, yes, there is that white arrogance again. It almost became a tired trope that even the journalists kind of sighed, like, really, dude? This guy is genuinely challenging you rightly on why you're here, and this is the best you can do? It seems South Africans aren't buying it anymore. This was all theatrics, Nolu.
Yeah, sure. I think for me, one of the things that I was quite surprised by is really the business owners that just allow Julius just to really bully them in a way that which I thought when you own your business, you have a right to stand up to someone who is an idiot like him. And I knew firsthand that that whole strategy or the whole move, it was going to go after white people. It was never about the people. It was nothing that Julius does is for the people, but rather he's trying to exert power to the white people who are just filled of white guilt, according to what I can sense out of that. And I think for me, and they gave him that place. All they wanted was just to be relevant and to trend, of course, as always. But other than that, it was never for the people at all. So for me, I just think it's something which, as a public, we need to stand up against. Especially that it's becoming a norm that the EFF will really disrupt the private sector, will disrupt the business sector that feeds the people that vote for him and for his party. And that thing, I think we really allowed it so long because we believe that they are doing justice for us. For that matter, they're not even. And the more we allow it, the more it becomes a norm. And most businesses will not really operate effectively as we need. We need more jobs in this country. We need more people
Absolutely.
to open up more businesses. We don't need some idiot who hates private sector, because he believes the government will give you everything. And he knows very well that's just a blatant lie. The same businesses that he pretends like he hates, he's the one that he goes out, buys cars from, and does all of these deals that he does with it, of which it's something that I feel that it's full of hatred, and it's just full of false ideologies that people have bought into. Yes, a lot of other people they have seen that Julius Malema and his crew, they don't have any power, and in doing that, they've hiked up on this new movement that is called sort of putting South Africa first, South African first, and they've changed the whole narrative and made it to be about fighting the white people as usual. So for me, I just think in that light, we need to stand up against this whole thing of the EFF, where they just disrupt our economy because they're disrupting our economy. And it's something which will really add more in the jobs that we don't have. Businesses will leave. Nobody wants to live in fear. And as much as businesses can stand up against them, they were scared that they might burn their premises, they might do something crazy. And it's reality. When they did that, Clicks had to foot the bill, or whoever did. It's not that these people were being eaten. At the same time, I can sympathize with them in that regard. But I think for me, at the same time, that the police system or whatever way that they can find to really tool up so high that they can fight back. We can't live like this. We need more jobs here. We don't need another political party that's going to destroy our economy. And we've allowed it to be a norm because we thought that these guys are just, they've got the right to do it. And they don't have. What they did was legal. Just plain out simple. And the business people need our support as the public to say, Julius Malema, to hell with you, and your crew. There's nothing better that you guys have done. You don't show us on paper. There's nothing good that you do. Instead, you just want to destroy this country and you want to see more people being hungry. Because when we are hungry, we can't think logically. So that means we can just vote for you and you can just continue being the person who is rich. So that's my view about it. And it's sickening and I'm sick and tired of it. And I just think that we need to do something about it. And I was quite surprised to see when we read Jacques who was fighting and saying this is nonsense. And they were just, trying to speak against this. A lot of people are seeing that this is just nonsense. And I think we need to just support the business people, or else our economy is just going to go down. It's really going right now.
Absolutely. We need the jobs, we need the entrepreneurs, we need the business, but something we need much more of, Dumo, is more unemployed politicians.
Agreed. I think, the political career must end very soon. I don't think politicians add any value to the system. There's an idea by a libertarian economist by the name of Anthony Mueller, and he said that we should just choose our lawmakers by lot, and you'll see. And those guys will actually do a better job than the politicians, because they will actually feel the negative effects of the laws that they implement if they stay there for 2 years max. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And just one thing on the Malema thing, I think the EFF as well has been emboldened by the Click saga. And this is the thing, Clicks, even though they made a mistake, they should have stood up to the EFF. Because now look what has happened. Now that they caved into them, the EFF has become emboldened, and now they're going around doing whatever they want. The EFF will stop when they meet the correct resistance. Look what happened to them at Brackenfell. Parents resisted against them. They told them, listen, you're not going to come here and disrupt. And it got bad, right? And then the DA sprayed them. Well, they used the cops to spray them with blue paint. And that's no accident, right? That is no accident, right? So I think they won't do that again. They won't do that again. So I'm not saying businesses, get your guns out and everything. All I'm saying is that the EFF will stop when you give them the correct resistance. They just loud people. They petrol bomb places and everything like that. But when you resist and you do it the right way, I'm not saying you must get into a physical altercation. Like sue them, make them pay out of their pockets, and embarrass them. That type of thing. And then you'll see they will stop and they won't try these publicity stunts again.
Well, let me support your point. The city of Cape Town did exactly that. After the Brackenfell incident, it sued the bejesus out of the EFF for the damage they caused to public infrastructure in that area. And you can bet your bottom dollar the EFF have not been back in the city of Cape Town. I mean, they made all sorts of promises. Yes, we'll be back. We'll galvanize more fighters. And we'll be back, Quaiters. But their members were firstly like, no, it took me a week to get that blue stuff out of my hair, number one. Number two, my beret was on the floor somewhere there. I'm not going back. Or the parents gave me a PK for even being there in the first place. Guys, I must thank every single one of you. We have run out of time, completely out of time. As always on the show, I'll give everybody final word just to let us know how we can find you on your social media or your institution. Let me begin with you, Jacques. How do the folks find you? And of course, Afriforum.
Hey, Steve, thanks for having me. It was a great conversation, and thank you to the rest of the panel. It was very insightful and uplifting. Well, anyone can follow us at our website. It's www.afriforum.co.za. And if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I'm just straight up at Jacques Broodryk.
Excellent, my brother. Thank you so much for being with us. Nolu, how do the people find you on your social, CC?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Sikhe. It's been a great chat. Sorry for my network issues and my sound. Basically, you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram as well. So that's my website, smoothmarket.co.za. Thank you once again, Sikhe.
Excellento. Crouse, how do the folks find you, dog?
So Two Crickets in a Thorn Tree is a podcast that I do. You can find it on all the podcast channels. I write for the Daily Friend. You can expect a piece coming up on the prospect of war in Europe and why what matters is the Russian parliament, which is not being covered at all in the West. But they've got a very important vote on Thursday. Check it out on the Daily Friend. And please, support the campaigns that the IRR runs, irr.org.za. You'll see it on our campaign page. You'll see it on the IRR Facebook page, Institute of Race Relations, or Twitter. I'm very excited. Just a few more thousand petitions over the last few days. I really want to get those petition numbers up as high as we can for the next round to take back to the union buildings together with some more tricks we have up our sleeve. Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, my brother. Last but not least, Dumo, how do the folks find you?
Right. You can just go to my website, manpatria.com. You'll find podcasts, articles, and all the likes there. Or you can just follow me on social media at Dumo Denga. And yeah, that's how you can find me.
Excellent. So thank you very much. And a big thanks to all of you. Very quickly, Gabriel, this week, you and I are going to have that conversation of effectively what could be a looming war between those two superpowers, the US and Russia, over Ukraine, of all things. But we'll have that conversation. I know there will be some people who are interested for it. A big thank you.
Отлично. Спасибо.
All right. I would have understood that, but I
Это
don't
хорошо.
speak Russian.
Молодец.
Homie, thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who joined us on here. Thank you for watching tonight's show. Super appreciated. Make sure you hit that like button, please, before you leave the stream. And of course, share it. Please help me beat some of the shadow banning that I've experienced by some of these social media companies. In fact, I can't even say that anymore in the comments. They flag me for that. They know who there is. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Liberty and Friends. Every Sunday we come to you at 8 p.m. This is the one long format show that I have. And of course, you'll find me every Wednesday for the BDL show. That's at 7:30 every Wednesday, and vlogs throughout the week. With that being said, thanks for watching. Remember, you can support the work that we do here at the BDL show. All of that information is in the descriptor of this video. Some of you are contributing $50 a month, others $100 a month. Guys, I seriously appreciate it. It puts diesel in the bucky and gets me to various locations as I do some work, by the way, in trying to build a new studio. Exciting stuff in that regard too. Guys, thank you so much for watching as always. And remember, good night, but also never trust a commie.